Welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. We are your hosts, Dr. Scott Hoye, clinical psychologist,
and Kyle Miller, licensed counselor. Psychology Talk is a unique conversation about psychology around the globe. We speak with psychology experts to keep you informed about current issues and trends. We advocate toward reducing stigma and educate about mental health.
While you're listening, please take a moment to give us a review and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or your favorite streaming service. It helps us to continue providing you with quality programming. And now, enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to the Psychology Talk podcast. I'm Dr. Scott Hoye. Today my guest is Dr. Jacqueline Benson. Dr. Benson is a licensed clinical psychologist and performing artist in Southern California. Today we're discussing how COVID-19 and the most recent influx of live performance cancellations have impacted the mental health of people working in the performing arts. Dr. Benson has the unique perspective as a psychologist and a working actor. She currently sees clients in private practice at Deeper Than Color in Oakland, California. Dr. Benson, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm so excited.
Yeah. Okay. Well, tell us about, what's going on with actors. I am I guess I'm a former actor since I really haven't done any productions in a million years, it seems. But what's going on with the mental health of performers, especially live performers?
Yeah. It's been really challenging. I speak from the perspective of someone who does a lot of musical theater. That's been the majority of my acting experience. So live theater on stage. And I've been really fortunate in the Bay Area to work really regularly in a lot of regional theaters. And the impact that COVID has had on that industry has been really, really intense. There's been so many cancellations. So obviously live theater is in person. So we want people to be able to come to the theater and have an experience. And then the creative teams and the production teams work really closely together for months, rehearsing and putting those shows together. So COVID kind of threw a wrench in all of that. So when we thought things were reopening, what ended up happening is things like shut down again. The most recent cycle of Omicron kind of decimated the reopening process. So we were thinking that things had kind of calmed down after Delta in terms of like Bay Area regional theater. So people were kind of reopening, starting to kind of do shows again over the Christmas holiday. And then Omicron hit, and there were a few casts that I know of who got hit really hard with COVID. And so their runs were canceled. Wow. So that's kind of been the pattern we've been seeing is like things reopen, and then people get sick and it shuts down again. And that's been a really similar pattern on Broadway as well in New York. Okay.
And how has that affected, has it affected? I mean, there's plenty of streaming shows and movies that are coming out. It probably isn't the same thing because closed sets are easier to control and contain.
Yeah, no, not at all. And actually, I know quite a few folks who work in TV and film. It's a really different industry, but they were hit very hard with this as well. The few folks that I know who are still working on TV and film sets and in studios as musicians, they are testing all the time for COVID. And then if they are going in person, they're getting tested like every single day on the production for COVID. And if they're not going in person, they're doing more remote recording. That's not necessarily possible with a musical. So that's one of the areas where the industries are very different. So for live theater, we can't do a musical on Zoom. I mean, you can, but it's a very, very different experience than going in person and putting an entire production together and having your live audience in front of you. So that has been really difficult as an actor. Like, I think the community is probably, for me, the most important thing about regional acting and being able to go in person and be around my castmates and get to know people. And that has pretty much not been possible because of COVID. So that's one clear way it's been affecting actors.
Well, yeah, if I remember fondly, sometimes not fondly, depending on the production, but more often than not, you develop a sense of camaraderie and a kind of family, right? And some people have even said that every time your show is done, right, whatever it might be you're working in, it's a huge letdown. It's like you go through a kind of midlife crisis each and every time,
Yeah.
And you're worried if you're going to get work again, if that's your main bread and butter is acting or performing. Yeah.
That's the cycle. A lot of the people that I know, a lot of my friends, they are regional actors, but they are also teaching artists. They have day jobs. They are working in other areas of the arts, whether that's production, and technical jobs in the theater in addition to performing in shows. So they wear a lot of hats, and it's been extremely difficult for those folks for everything to be shut down, because if you teach and you're still working in the performing arts, that's been affected by COVID as well. So having to kind of go online for theater arts classes and dance classes. And so even that stream of income, I think, has really been disrupted by the pandemic.
Yeah. I know I do have patients of mine. Sometimes I'll refer people out to and say, hey, maybe you should look up taking some acting courses for social anxiety and just getting in touch with their emotions more. And that has been, yes, it's been kind of on again, off again in the black boxes here in Chicago or remotely doing scene study, things like that. So it has to be kind of difficult. Are your is most of your clientele from the performing arts, or do you have kind of like a generalist kind of practice, Jackie?
I have kind of a generalist practice. So I have a few folks who do work in the performing arts, and I love that because it is a specialty for me. And I have experience working with folks who are performers or aspiring performers, especially teens is really kind of a population that I love working with. But now I'm seeing a lot more adults as well. So I have kind of a wide variety of folks that I'm working with right now. And I think definitely something that comes up with adults who are performing artists that I work with is the financial concern and kind of the financial impact of all of this. I think that like money for actors is always a concern, but with all of the disruption that COVID has caused with live performance, I think that has been one area that has been the most difficult for a lot of people to navigate is how they're going to pay their bills if they have contracts or shows that were on the books and then got canceled. Figuring out how they're going to make up those losses is really, really challenging.
Yeah, and this is affecting people. When you say regional, are you talking about like within the United States, people doing like taking a show on the road, like a Broadway production, or otherwise? Could it just be like regional dinner theaters or things like that, or even community theaters, or maybe not an equity house, but yeah.
Yeah, kind of all of the above. And it's interesting because my experience, as I call myself like a regional actor, I'm non-equity. I've never been a part of the union. Mm-hmm. I've worked with a ton of folks who are equity. So local California theaters in the Bay Area and in SoCal as well. Often those casts, when you go and see a show in your local, community at a regional theater, that cast is made up of both equity and non-equity performers. So those are local performers, and then they may be folks who have flown in, who are equity, who are coming to do a contract. So those are professional theaters that I have never done a production that I didn't get paid.
Well, that's good. That's good. You got paid. That's a very good thing. But this is people I don't think realize how important the arts are for their psyches.
No,
you really don't. I mean, we could go into how the theater originally in as far as ancient Greece goes, it was a therapeutic experience within like looks like I'm going to have to edit this couple of seconds as I have a brain fart, into the Asclepions, right? Because they were therapeutic experience, cathartic experience, where we get the kind of the idea of catharsis, not just the medical term, but the psychological catharsis. And I don't think that people really understand until they've lost it. If their community has a strong theater presence, or at least one really good professional and a couple good community theaters, they might not realize how much it feeds their soul until they haven't been doing it. They haven't been going, right, or been able to like purchase seasonal tickets.
My own experience of like finding my way into regional theater really reflects that, because I originally studied classical cello. I have a music degree from Cal State Long Beach. And when I was in undergrad, I really thought, I'm going to be a professional musician. And it was really difficult for me to wrap my head around that, because it involves a lot of time playing alone in isolation and practicing and training. So when I decided to double major and get a human development degree, and I got interested in psychology, I was like, okay, I'm going to go to grad school to be a psychologist. I kind of went totally, the other direction. I moved to the Bay Area and went to grad school and struggled with isolation and anxiety and being on my own and living on my own. And so I kind of ended up still struggling with that. And one of the things that really helped me cope was I was like, I got to perform again. I didn't realize when I started grad school that I would miss it so much, because studying cello and kind of growing up in music, I was performing really regularly when I lived here in SoCal. So I auditioned for Berkeley Playhouse, actually. That was the first time I ever worked with them, when I was a first year at the Wright Institute in grad school for psychology. And I booked a show with them in a regional theater, did a show and fell in love with it. And that really kind of is where I found my community of people who supported me, who loved the arts the way that I love the arts, who were passionate about the things I was passionate about. And that is what I continued to do that through grad school. And it really helped me to figure out a way to kind of decompress from the challenges of just being a training psychologist and trying to navigate grad school. It's definitely hard to juggle both of those things, but it was always worthwhile for me because I felt like I needed that creative outlet for my mental health and dealing with a lot of the anxiety that I have. So that's really my story. Like, I am a huge advocate for the performing arts because I really think it's why I was able to function and kind of find myself while I was training.
Okay. Well, and that's amazing because I did kind of the opposite. I kind of sputtered out with the stuff I was doing performance wise, and I think I'll just switch gears altogether. Although I'm sure it would have been. I don't know if I could have managed my graduate experience plus been involved in shows. That would have been kind of interesting. I'm sure. It certainly would have fed my soul a lot because I do miss that on, in a lot of levels. And like you said, once an actor, always an actor, but I do utilize it to a certain degree in psychotherapy, right? And, hypnosis or kind of visualization, guided visualization, using the imagination and connecting with people.
That creative work is always kind of there. If you're someone who is creative, I do think that there's so much of that in mental health and in the work that we do. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's one of the reasons. I mean, the reason I got into psychotherapy was because I was interested in Michael Chekhov's work. I hadn't actually studied it, but I was reading about it, and I saw correlations between hypnosis and his work, his imagery work, and decided to kind of check it out and get trained in that before I came to grad school. But there's a room for a high amount of creativity in behavioral health, and there's also room for none, depending on where you're at, how you're doing things, right? So the clients you're seeing now are dealing with stress around money, anxiety about as we all are, about the pandemic, and when will they perform again, right? This kind of like jump-starting productions and being disappointed. Is there any?
Yeah.
Is there any light at the end of the tunnel besides that which you provide them? Is there any light at the end of the tunnel that they see going forward?
I think the pattern that I'm seeing now, just in the arts and in musical theater and live theater in general, is that people are trying to kind of put things back together. So I'm now actively auditioning again myself. I know a lot of my colleagues are as well. Even though I had a show that was supposed to be happening in the spring that was canceled, other theater companies here in Southern California and in the Bay are auditioning and hoping, to cast their spring season. So we're hoping that things are going to kind of come back to life. So I think in a lot of ways, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. This is like the regional theater scene is plucky. I will say, like,
plucky. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Dude, what is like, how operationally defined? What is plucky?
Resilient. We have something that really is worth fighting for. So I think I've been talking to clients and then talking to other actors about this dynamic as well. I think there is a lot of faith in the fact that, like, this is a really difficult situation, the pandemic, to navigate, but we're going to figure this out because it's so worthwhile, the community that we have built. So in a lot of ways, that's the light at the end of the tunnel. And I do think you mentioned that dynamic of, like, you do a show, the show closes and then you fall into this depression. That's something that I've talked with a ton of actors about. And it's something that we deal with, pandemic or not, around just the nature of our work and how it's these short bursts of time where you have a project and it's almost like these highs and lows, right? Like, you're in a project, you're booked, you're working, you're on a high, and then it closes or it ends, and there you go. You're kind of at the bottom again and wondering if you're going to work. And a lot of that is what inspired me to start Center Stage Psychology, because I do think the challenges that actors and performing artists face around that dynamic and managing their mental health on a regular basis is very different than other jobs and other fields.
So I think we spoke about that before we started the official recording, before we rolled the tape, as they used to say. So this is a very cool endeavor you have. Tell us about Center Stage Psychology. Cool name too.
Yeah. So I started Center Stage Psychology last year. It is an organization that creates mental health resources and provides consultation services for arts and performing arts education organizations. So we talk about mental health. We do mental health workshops, and we are really invested in creating research-based and evidence-based research and sorry, my brain. Hopefully you can edit this out. My brain.
Okay. Snip.
I'm with you. So we create mental health resources for performing artists and folks who work in the arts and entertainment industry. So we provide consultation to production companies and arts educations through our partnerships and collaborations. So we'll come in and do a workshop for a dance studio, dance nonprofits. And so nonprofits that do education for kids, so drama classes for kids. Recently did consultation for a wonderful nonprofit called the Quentin Street Project that provides theater arts education for schools that don't have access to that. And they're also working with the Family Justice Center in Contra Costa County to provide some arts education classes for kids who are in their mental health programs. So their parents are going through a divorce, there's trauma or a history of child abuse in the family. So things like that, where arts kind of overlaps with mental health. Awesome. Center Stage is really focused on kind of helping people bridge that gap between mental health and the arts.
Okay. Yeah, I assume that, like, if you're working with adults, sorry, I just pronounced that like a Brit. If you're working with adults and children, There's a difference between, as we all know, there's a kind of idea of play therapy. Or I just got off a call with a psychologist or a pediatrician who does hypnosis with kids, because kids they suck. They're so imaginative. Like if you throw them in a sterile office, it's not going to really reach them on that visceral level, right? But if you give them imaginative play time, that can be very helpful. And it can be helpful for adults too. Like I said, I'll refer people out to local, workshops here that are maybe open to having anybody doing scene study, right? So that they can grow emotionally and imaginatively. And sometimes that's, is that kind of where this interface is, or this bridge is between psychology and the arts that you're looking at?
Yeah, I think that it is. And it's kind of a bridge that I realized was there in my own practice as a clinician when I was going through training, because I'm super passionate about working with teens. And when I was in training, I did a lot of my postdoc and residency training with Kaiser. I was running a lot of teen DBT groups, and DBT is very manualized workbook treatment, which I think is incredible.
That's very creative. What do you say?
Super very, very helpful. And I deeply value the interventions. And with teens, they were coming into this DBT group and they're like, I hate this. I don't, they don't want to be there. They're forced to be there. They feel forced to be there by their parents. And so I was looking for ways to engage them in this group. And a lot of the solutions I came up with were based in media and kind of integrating TV clips and songs and music and creative arts and kind of figuring out what they were interested in, and then teaching the curriculum using those things. And a lot of that came from my theater experience, my experience teaching as, a performing artist. When you want to engage kids and get them to perform and do things that are, that don't feel natural and kind of getting people out of their comfort zone, those skills and abilities that I already had, I kind of brought into this, and it was a way for me to engage them. So I realized there was a bridge there.
Yeah. It seems to me that like as not, psychology and psychotherapy and behavioral health, it can sometimes get in its own way of delivering what it's trying to help people do. So if you do not find metaphors from whatever, popular culture or fairy tales or what have you, or if you're not able to bridge the gap in yourself and explain things so that the person doesn't feel like they're under a microscope or in some sort of clinical setting, they're probably not going to grow so fast.
Yeah, for sure.
It helps with the buy-in.
It does really help with buy-in. And I found that approach kind of universally was a way for me to engage clients. And I think it's really similar with adults as well, kind of helping them to find things that they enjoy and kind of purposely making the therapy reconnecting and reengaging with those things. And a lot of that is creative. I think people tend to move away from their creative pursuits naturally as they get older in a lot of ways in our society. I don't know if that has to do with capitalism, or there's so many things we could talk about with why do people,
I think it was Henry Miller when he came back from France. He drove around the United States and he wrote an essay, or I think it's a book called Air Conditioned Nightmare, where he talks about how nothing had changed when he left for Paris. Everybody in America, one of the reasons he left is everybody seemed to want to be a banker or in finance, right, or a lawyer. And he said it hadn't changed much in the 50s when he came back. So, I think that it's not because people don't want to do creative things. They do desperately. It's just that they think that the rewards, money it's a big reward. Secondary gains from money are huge, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think with the arts, that's kind of an ongoing challenge that people are navigating that relationship. For a lot of my friends, I was really lucky. My parents really were okay with me doing anything that I wanted to do when I was growing up. They were like, as long as you're happy and you can make some kind of living to take care of yourself, sure. Like, be a musician.
Cool parents. Kudos to them.
But I had a lot of friends who their parents were not like that. They were like, absolutely not. You cannot do performing arts, even if you love it. It doesn't make any money. You're not going to be able to support yourself. And I think that's kind of a stereotype and a myth that continues on. And there is some truth to the challenges around kind of making it as a performing artist. But I think that has more to do with like, the high and low, kind of the way the industry works, right? Like finding your place in auditioning, and it's challenging to have to do that as opposed to having a salary and something.
Well, it's a bit like, my undergrad was a BFA in fine art, right? In art history. And there was definitely a dearth of any business classes, or even like if you had a good mentor, they might say, this is kind of how you have to do. I had a couple of those, but this is kind of what you got to do. This is the system. But the program had been set up like that. Those programs had been set up in, I think, the 40s and 50s, so that the idea was everybody would get an MFA and teach, and that would solve the problem of you eating as an artist. But then, as you know about MFAs, no matter where you look at those, but in the performing arts or in the visual arts, right, there's a lot of graduates and not many teaching positions available for them to teach.
Right.
So there's a real problem in figuring out. I think all artistic industries we don't nurture and take care of our own.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. And it's a conversation that I've had with musical theater actors, but also with classical musicians. I know quite a few incredibly talented musicians, composers, conductors. And this is a conversation that we have about how when you're training and you're growing up, you're just focused on, learning my rep, getting better. But then when you actually get out and you're trying to navigate a career, it is so much more complicated than just winning a seat in an orchestra. Like, I think there's so much more to it. And,
you don't have to, like, people want to hear the cello someplace else. They don't necessarily want it. They might even want to hear you just play it solo. It's a great instrument, right? Viola is a really kick-ass instrument too, and people want it. If they heard you playing it someplace besides an orchestra hall or a recital hall, they enjoy it. People love music. I think that there's the disservice is done in that. Like you mentioned, you don't know where to go for the auditions, whether it's, you certainly know which orchestras, holding auditions, but then you're going to be competing for a chair with thousands of other people. But the other aspects of the industry aren't there. Certainly in acting, if all you do is audition as an actor and you don't have anything else within the industry, it's a disservice to you as a human being not to teach you about ways you can work in the industry whilst keeping your acting chops up and performing.
Yeah. And I think in thinking about like training and mentorship and education, how we teach people about these things, I don't think that the way that you and I are talking about it right now is really ever how it's presented to students. Rarely.
No, absolutely not. Yeah. It's all about the stuff in the academics, the stuff in the book, or the stuff that's in your music book, or the sides you're given, right? It's like, it's like how to do the performing, but it's not about how to market yourself, how to survive. Within the industry. Yeah. And there's a ton of money in the industry to be made, not just in front of the camera or on the stage under the lights.
For sure, 100%. And I think because people are educated in that way, I don't think we as artists and performers, we get very caught up in measuring our success, right? Like we're auditioning. Why am I not booking something? Why is it not? We think about those things out of context when we go to an audition and, 5 auditions, 10 auditions, and we still haven't booked anything, then we're starting to internalize it. And we're talking about mental health. Like, we don't always think about that in context of how we were trained, how we were educated, the realities of the industry. And then add a pandemic on top of that, I think that's really what's making me want to talk about this right now and really want to spotlight performing artists and mental health, because it was already really hard to be in this industry. And now it's kind of just compounded by the context that we're in right now.
Yeah. I mean, So, gosh, okay. So you're providing psychotherapy with some of your clients are performing artists. What is it you're doing with them? Like, take me on a journey about how you're assisting them in a typical issue. I mean, we can give it, if you want to give it a clinical name like anxiety or depression, you can do that too. But what typically happens?
So I think what usually happens is, it's different depending on who it is, but one of the challenges that tends to come up right at the beginning is anxiety, right? Like, what am I going to do? Nothing is working. Nothing is going the way that I want it to go. I feel like this is going to be forever. So the usual things that people tell, things that anxiety tells us, this is never going to be different. It's always going to be like this. What do I do now in the meantime, And then when we're thinking about like how depression can really keep people from doing things, if your job is performing right now, the requirement for a lot of auditions is self-taping. So you have to be able to coordinate yourself around self-taping at home and sending it into an audition, as opposed to going in person somewhere or auditioning. And self-tapes were a thing before the pandemic, but now it's even more of a thing, right? And
are there more people trying to jump into the realm of like voiceover work?
Some people, yes, for sure. But it's a completely different industry.
True. It's not, it's performance, but not really.
Yeah, it's different. And it is performance, but it's also like, you got to learn something totally different. And the business side of that is very different than, acting and being on stage or being a live performer. So I think folks are navigating things like that, managing their anxiety around that. There's a scarcity fear of like, there's not enough jobs and things are being canceled. So it was already competitive. Now it's even more competitive. I think one thing we haven't talked about is that added layer of being an actor of color or a performer of color, right, which is a whole nother.
Well, are my perceptions correct in assuming that there are some corrective measures that are being made, and there are more? There are more parts for people of color or different ethnicities besides your homegrown, homespun, European white-looking individuals.
That is the hope. I think it feels very 2 steps forward, 1 step back a lot of the time. So yes, there are more opportunities. I definitely think there's been more of a conversation about that during the pandemic, but the challenges are still there. I think it's, it's not a resolved kind of thing. It's not perfect. It's extremely challenging to be an actor of color in this industry. Also, I think that people want good stories, right? They just want good stories. And if you add, I think that Hollywood has a tendency to really like these days, especially kind of like showboat an issue, and that becomes the thing. It becomes like the checkbox. So like, you just want good stories. It doesn't like I want to see a good story. I don't care. I want people of color to have their stories told, right? I want everybody to have their story told, but like, make a good story. And I'm also assume that people are afraid that Hollywood's going to drop it once it's not the issue du jour, right? Yeah, and I think that really affects the relationship that actors of color have with their own journeys and their identities, right? Because we just want to tell stories a lot of the time. I think for myself as an actor, I've been in The Color Purple, the musical. It was a fantastic artistic experience for me. And not every show that I do can be that show. And also that show is extremely emotionally taxing for actors of color. It's really a lot of trauma in the experience. It's a lot of challenges acting wise and just emotionally. And the last show I did was Little Shop of Horrors, which was amazing.
That'd be fun.
I'm kind of finding myself leaning into comedies right now and things that are lighter, and I want that diversity. And I think that does mirror a lot of actors of color, particularly Black actors. What we want is diversity in our acting experiences. However, it is quite common to be pigeonholed. So to be called in for those shows, obviously you need a Black cast to do shows that are traditionally cast in that way, but that doesn't mean that's all we want on our resume. And so it is a very different experience, because you can't go in for something. We're always going to be Black walking into the room and telling the story. So I think the industry is trying to figure out how to, honestly integrate those things. And I don't think that's ever.
I don't think, is it really a consideration what a person looks like if they're great for the role on the emotional and kind of psychic level? Like, because for years, it's not a thing to have like a multicultural cast do Shakespeare. I mean, come on. It's like, it doesn't matter who's playing Othello or who's playing Macbeth, or, it doesn't really matter. Those roles are, it's a step. Speaking of Greek theater, I mean, it's obviously modern. It's written for a modern mind, right? Yeah. Or that kind of turning point from the Renaissance to now. But it's also, it's two steps back in the theater of the Middle Ages and Greek tragedies and comedies, right? I mean, it's like, it's kind of universal. You could do it with anybody.
And if we've learned from like recent Shakespeare in the Parks and like productions in New York where the cast was all Black, I mean, those are incredible performances, incredible productions. And so I think there are changes that are happening, and there's the reality of it happens slowly, even when people are having the conversation. I don't think the change is immediate. It's hard to be a Black actor out in the industry auditioning. That has been my experience.
I'll bet.
I've had, good experiences, bad experiences, everything in between.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and that sucks. That sucks, right? I mean,
it does. Yeah. And I also think that's a big part of Center Stage, is creating a space for people to talk about how this has affected their mental health, and to kind of in an intentional way acknowledge that talking about mental health in performing arts, it should be something that is normalized, and it's not necessarily. I think a lot of times there's stigma around it, or, even though we are being told to dig deep and like bring our emotions and our full selves to characters, we're not really talking about mental health unless something goes wrong. And I want to kind of change that dynamic in the arts.
So like having more of a generative take on mental health in the arts. Yeah. Okay. Like how do you do things to bolster your self-esteem?
Yeah. Yeah. How do you deal with the fact that when your show closes, you're low and you notice this is a pattern, right? And it's an experience that other people are having. And why aren't we talking about this? As wonderful as this community is, and we feel so held when we're doing projects together, I think in between. Yeah.
And you don't get that. That's another thing that's not spoken of in training, right? For the most part. And it's probably not, I didn't get any university training in acting. I was my school of hard knocks and some, and some studios I studied under, studied in, or people I studied with in New York. But no one in academia. I have friends who went to university, and this is just not really spoken of. Like what are you going to do with these highs and lows? Because you could it's like being manic. It's like being manic and then depressed. It kind of mimics that bipolar kind of fluctuation in mood swings. It can, and for people who happen to have more of a proclivity for that, it's probably going to trigger it for them at some point, or the drinking or the drugs might happen.
Yeah, I was going to say, we haven't even talked about that dynamic around substances, and that is such a thing in the artistic world. And we don't really talk, I mean, we talk about it amongst each other, but in terms of the conversation kind of being open, and we're really thinking about mental health and how do we make this better in our community? How do we support each other around these dynamics? I would love to see that conversation kind of move from, actor to actor community, in our own community, to kind of a larger conversation when we're thinking about it, when we're educating students, right? Like, I think during training, talking about mental health, it's super important in the dance world. Some of the consultation work I've been doing with Center Stage has been around ballet. I'm really excited about that. And there is such a stigma in the ballet world around mental health. And I would love to contribute to changing that, and providing resources for that. So I think that this
I think there's
starts in education.
The things that come to mind would be drug abuse and body dysmorphia, right? I mean, those are two things that are hush-hushed, I'm sure. They're better now, right? But yeah, there's this particular type of body people are looking for in ballerinas. And, and in the dance world as a whole, I think, things are slowly similar to when we're talking about diversity in the theater world and in live performance. Yes. Body-wise in the dance world, things are slowly kind of changing, but it's slow. It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And is mental health always a part of that conversation? No. There are still a lot of people in training who are being told that their bodies are wrong, or, really things that we know are detrimental in performing arts education, but those practices are kind of continuing. So I think that's really my focus, like with Center Stage, is keeping this conversation going and kind of giving it a new platform to really integrate mental health into it. Well, speaking of that, like we've been picking on academic training programs. Have you been trying to reach out as part of Center Stage Psychology's mission to try to maybe start to work and do consultation and workshops within university programs in California or wherever?
Not yet. The bulk of my work so far has been with performing arts nonprofits, which is amazing because the 2 nonprofits I've been working with are both they're both education based and working with young dancers and young actors, which is wonderful. But I would love to expand into working with university programs. I think that would be incredible. Oftentimes there are counseling centers on each university campus that could also be a resource that, we could provide support and consultation around, kind of bridging the gap between their performers and students and the resources on campus.
But I think that it's making yourself known there, right? Making yourself known to those people. Yeah. I forgot. I lost my train of thought here. So basically with nonprofits right now, that's what I was going to ask you. How many people on your team? Is it just you right now, or are you and a couple people?
So right now it is me. I have a small and wonderful, small but mighty business advisory board that's made up of several colleagues and professionals that I deeply love and trust, which has been amazing. And then I also work with Deeper Than Color. So Deeper Than Color is a group practice run by Dr. Bedford Palmer. He is incredible. He has been really supportive of me. Deeper Than Color already specializes in social justice oriented psychotherapy. So all of our clinicians are really well versed in that and trained. And they also do diversity, equity, and inclusion consultations. So that is something I've been able to learn about and have resources around because of him. So he's great. He is a faculty member at St. Mary's College. And I'm just learning a lot from him. So I have a lot of support right now for kind of building Center Stage and kind of finding our mission and our path. And so it's been really exciting. It's me, but it's not just me.
Well, that's great. Well, I'm sure, as you grow, and as needed and as you can afford, you'll probably add other people too, or people can jump in on the mission. Really exciting stuff. interesting times we're living in, which is, I think, a Chinese curse, I've been told. You live in interesting times, but you're stepping up to the plate, and really, I feel, just speaking to you, I just get this really great sense of warmth and passion for this. This is exciting stuff that you're involved in.
Thank you. Thank you. It means a lot to me. I definitely feel like my journey to becoming a psychologist has also been really defined by my journey as a performing artist, and kind of all of the opportunities I've had to study music and theater and perform.
Well, I'd say that psychotherapy definitely is a performing art. I think you're shaking your head. Yes.
Yes.
We're on the same page as far as that. But a lot of people a lot of our colleagues probably would disagree. But it's maybe there's a stigma around performing arts, like we were talking about earlier. Like, nobody will take it seriously unless it's science, right?
Right. Yeah. And I also am passionate about bridging the gap between that, because research is wonderful, and it takes a really long time to do. And I think what I find when I talk to clients sometimes is like, in the meantime, what am I supposed to do until we understand more about this topic or this issue?
Yeah. Let me get right back to you. I have to go read about what your issue is. I'll be right back. 10 hours later, you know what? I don't see anything in the literature. Let's make something up. No. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's a lot of it is the bridge, right? Yeah. Like, as I was in grad school and I was studying mental health and like really getting into seeing clients and working in the theater, I had so many conversations backstage with actors who were like, oh my gosh, you're studying psychology. And they were sharing their experiences with me and talking about mental health and their own, why they're interested in it and experiences they've had. And so I think some of it is just bridging the gap between industries and fields in terms of having these conversations. And I hope that that's something that I can do in my career, because these identities are not so different. Like, we talked about me being like multi-hyphenate, but
multi-hyphenate, you have taught me something. You taught me a lot today, but you certainly taught me multi-hyphenate. What is that? Operationalize that. What is it?
As far as I understand, it's like when you have a bunch of different titles and jobs. So like, entrepreneurship. So I'm a cellist, an actor, a singer. I also design for the stage. I've done a lot of wig design, which I laugh about, but I'm super proud of for the stage. And I've also done a lot of teaching as a performing artist. So I'm like 5, and I'm a psychologist, so 6 multi-hyphenate.
Okay, well, I get it. Well, but most people, if they thought about it, they might think of themselves in terms of multi-hyphenation. I think everybody is a jack of all trades, perhaps a master of many of them. Yeah, which I think you proved yourself to me. You are.
Yeah, I hope so, and I think integrating all of it has been my goal for a long time, and so hopefully that shows up in the work that I'm looking to kind of combine all of my interests and do something meaningful.
Bridge building, bridge building. I think that's kind of the theme of this talk. Cool.
Yeah, I like that.
All right. Well, all the best in building further bridges for you, Dr. Benson.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. This has been really great.
Yeah, this is a great conversation. Come back anytime.
Oh, I'd love to.
Okay, bye. Thank you for listening to the Psychology Talk podcast. This podcast is intended for informative and entertainment purposes only. If you need a mental health professional, please seek one out. All material, copyright, the Psychology Talk podcast. Music is provided by the oddly Italianate named band Serenati. Ciao.